1.5 years later. 22. Graduate. May 2011, Duke University. Savings, $1,156. On May 14, 2011, I woke up on the floor in the corner of an Embassy Suites hotel room in Raleigh, North Carolina. The night before, my mom, dad, and aunt had flown to North Carolina from Buffalo. They had planned on sharing a king-size bed, while I slept alone on the pull-out couch in the other room. But just minutes after the lights were turned off, I heard some terrifying snarls that sounded like dinosaurs moaning in battle from the bedroom. My aunt, we then learned, had a snoring problem. It was a roar that with each passing sound wave made the paintings on the wall rattle and my hair flutter. Justifiably, my dad left the room to join me on the pull-out couch. But he was, I was afraid to learn, just as bad, emitting enough sniffles and snorts to make me think I'd bedded down with a pride of slumbering lions. This time, I left the bed, grabbing my pillow, snagging a towel from the bathroom, and sandwiching my head in between them in the farthest corner of the room. Poorly rested, I woke up anxious and groggy. It was the day of my liberal studies graduation, the conclusion to my 2.5-year van-dwelling experiment. In a couple of hours, to my absolute horror, I was to give a speech as my graduating class's student speaker. After publishing an article about my first 2 semesters at Duke, part of me, despite my social disinclinations and solitary penchants, hoped to enjoy a period of fame as the campus van man. I imagined myself walking around campus, giving high fives to strangers, fist-bumping professors, and shaking hands with janitors. I'd walk by a group of girls, and they'd cup their hands around their mouths to hide coquettish smiles. Perhaps I'd even take a disillusioned undergrad under my wing. Maybe I could be the campus sage. I'd wear loose white clothing, grow out my beard, and speak in aphorisms to any underclassmen who'd journey the mile on foot to my sacred parking space. Things, needless to say, didn't turn out this way. Duke administration, not sure how to handle the situation, told the local newspaper that they were prepared to offer me guidance and counseling. A tenant in the apartment complex by my parking spot complained to the landlord that my presence made him or her uncomfortable. I was kicked out of the mill lot, but I was generously given a new parking spot in the middle of campus, but only if I signed a contract saying I wouldn't sue Duke and that I'd never live in the van on campus again after graduating. Footnote: as a result of my experiment, Duke has prohibited students from living in their vehicles on campus for reasons of, as one Duke official explained, safety, security, health, and liability. Fair enough. I lived in the van for another year. I was visited by another mouse. I dealt with a swarm of ants that overtook my storage container, and I salvaged food from the student union garbage cans whenever I was hungry and low on cash. I took 2 more creative writing courses and other random enriching courses like History of Economic Theory and History of Sincerity, and did an independent study on student debt and the self. After 2 years in the van, and my final semester spent living on a small farm in rural North Carolina where I wrote my final project, I completed my goal of graduating debt-free. I ended my experiment with $1,156 in the bank and about the same number of possessions I had arrived with. I had a monetarily useless degree, no real home, and hardly anything to my name. Thoreau said he found it hard to leave Walden Pond, but decided to move out because he had several more lives to live. Like Thoreau, I thought I could have happily remained in the van, but I felt that I had more lives to live too. What those lives might be, I wasn't sure. But the decision about what life I should live took on an undesired urgency when a respectable magazine, whose editors were acquainted with my Salon article, insisted that I apply for a writing job that paid in the high 30s. Their one stipulation was that I had to make a 3-year commitment. Just like that, I could have an apartment, health insurance, a stable year-round job, a decent salary, a comfortable, respectable life. The The graduation ceremony was held at the Washington Duke Inn, a grandiose hotel near campus next to an 18-hole, 120-acre island green golf course. Men in starched livery opened the doors for my family and me. We walked past bronze busts of Duke presidents, framed pictures of the Duke family, and olive drapes, each set probably worth more than my van. I was used to Duke's extravagant frills, but my parents oohed and ahed admiringly at the ornate chandeliers, the freshly cut flowers in vases, the desks made of bird's-eye maple with a burled walnut veneer. Family members were dressed in their crisp Sunday best, and soon-to-be grads swished around in dark robes. Beneath my robe, I wore my sky blue dress shirt that I'd bought for $3 from the Salvation Army, the 14-year-old pair of dress pants I wore to my high school homecoming dance, dress socks I got for free from the Park Service, and a pair of old beat-up brown shoes. The origins of my tie-in underwear were unknown. Fellow graduates and I paraded into a banquet hall, where we were escorted to our seats. Mine was in the front row. As a member of the faculty began the ceremony, I nervously leafed through my speech one last time. As I sat there, awaiting my turn to speak, I thought about all the people who had played a role in my story. While Thoreau downplayed the society around him, calling them insignificant, not a day went by when I didn't think of the people who'd been a part of my journey. Jack Rekoff, the wise man of Wiseman, is still hunting and trapping and giving tours for Coldfoot. James, the 75-year-old vehicle dweller, still lives in Coldfoot and works for the BLM, but he has upgraded from his Chevy Suburban to a cozy BLM cabin. The Gulf Coast Conservation Corps has become defunct for lack of funding, and I've lost contact with nearly everyone I worked with there, just as I've lost contact with my fellow voyageurs and the hundreds of people I hitchhiked with. Sammy took to a life of adventure, canoeing Canadian rivers and biking West Coast roads. Now she works at a ski park and studies at a college in California. She hitchhikes alone, and I tell her that I now know what it's like to go through what my mother went through. Chuck moved to Boston and began working for a nature conservancy. My mom and dad still think I'm sort of insane, but never have they shown the faintest sign of distancing themselves from me. And Josh? After Josh quit, he became outspoken about the evils he witnessed at Westwood. He got in touch with a law firm that was filing a class-action lawsuit against the school, and they had him star in a few anti-Westwood commercials to recruit other whistleblowers. And in August 2010, when the ruthless sales tactics of the whole for-profit college industry were coming under the scrutiny of Congress, Josh was asked to testify before the U.S. Senate. Yes, the actual Senate. He didn't hesitate. He didn't worry about burning bridges. This would be his grand moment of redemption. He flew from Denver to Washington, D.C. Waking up in his hotel room on the day of the hearing, he opened his suitcase to learn, to his absolute horror, that he'd forgotten to bring dress pants. With the testimony just an hour away, Josh, wearing a jacket and tie, along with a pair of faded jeans, sprinted through the nation's capital in search of a men's clothing shop. He found a men's warehouse and tried to yank the door open. The store had yet to open, though, so he desperately pounded the glass doors. Not having fully caught his breath, he explained his situation to the tailor, bought pants, and then jogged to the Capitol building, breathing heavily and soaked in sweat. He sat down at a table in front of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, looking up at Senators Tom Harkin, Mike Enzi, Al Franken, and others. His hair was slightly disheveled, and one corner of his shirt collar leaned over to rest on his jacket lapel. Otherwise, he looked all business. "Now, Mr. Pruin, welcome to these proceedings," said Senator Harkin. Josh coughed, thanked the chairman with a quavering voice, and commenced his speech. My name is Josh Pruin," he said. "I'm a former admissions representative of Westwood College, or as Senator Mikulski might have referred to it, a bounty hunter." He talked about how students had been manipulated and misled, what resulted from the intense atmosphere on the admissions sales floor, and why he decided to quit. "I quit my job at Westwood on a Monday morning," he said. "I started admitting things to myself that I'd been avoiding for almost 6 months. I accepted that I could no longer tell myself that it was possible to work for Westwood and consider myself to be working within any degree of ethical standards. That Monday morning, I walked out of the building and never returned. When I left," he continued, "I had no expectation or reasonable prospect for finding another job quickly. I didn't really think about that. I just thought about how naive I was when I applied for the job, hoping to help students make a better future for themselves through college. Instead, I left fearing the students I had enrolled would end up with a mountain of debt and little or nothing to show for it." Westwood felt so damaged by Josh's testimony that they denied several of his allegations, called parts of his speech deliberately false, and asked that his record be removed from the testimony. Today, Josh is a grant writer for a nonprofit organization in Denver, Colorado that promotes early childhood education. In 6 years, he has paid off $55,000 of his debt. We are still best friends and email each other on an almost daily basis. He still owes $11,000. After the program director's introduction, I was called up to the podium. I rose from my chair and paid careful attention to each step forward, careful not to step on my robe. I looked at the audience. My hands were trembling, and I'd forgotten how to breathe. I placed the sheaf of papers on the lectern and looked at the suit and tie audience. My mom and aunt waved, and my dad smiled. Here I am, I thought, a van dweller among the well-to-do, a high school slacker about to give a speech at one of the greatest universities in the world. Just a few years ago, I was falling apart and hearing voices in my head. I was a boring, indebted suburbanite, and yet now, Josh and I, a couple of losers in high school, are living fulfilling, inspired, principled lives. Perhaps we changed because we were able to leave this world for a bit, this world of jobs and schools and buildings, and got to see a different one, one of mountains and forests and rivers, and of the Brooks Range. Maybe it was because we'd somehow managed to bring back the wild with us. As some of my fellow graduates may know, I began, I've spent much of the past 2.5 years at Duke living in my van. I'd like to share my story with you, but first, I should address some common misconceptions. No, for the millionth time, I do not live in a van down by the river. No, I haven't abducted anyone. And no, my van, I promise you, is certainly not a rockin'. But please don't come a knockin', that would really freak me out. I came to Durham in January of 2009, a couple of days before the start of the spring semester. 2 months before, I'd finished paying off my $32,000 undergraduate student debt. To pay it off, I worked for almost 3 years, mostly at low-wage jobs, putting nearly every penny of every paycheck toward my student loans. While I was working, I told myself that I'd do 2 things whenever I finally paid the debt off. The first was that I would never go into debt again. The second was that I'd enroll in a graduate liberal studies program so I could resume my education. So began 2 different educations. The first was an education in van dwelling, in loneliness, in frugality, in figuring out how to wash my pots and pans without running water. The second was an education in liberal studies, in Diogenes, in Rousseau, in writing, speaking, and thinking. Yet, it wasn't long before these educations came together, like 2 rivers meeting at a confluence and flowing together as one. That's the thing about a liberal education. It's a deeply personal affair. And even if we are enrolled in courses that may seem to have little relevance to our lives, the nature of a liberal education, the lectures, the discussions, the writings, tends to bring faraway subjects close to home. Some call the liberal arts self-indulgent and impractical without realizing that the classics The social sciences, the humanities, are fertilizers for democracy. And when the arts are scattered onto college campuses, they create a healthy soil into which students can plant themselves and grow into empathetic, introspective, and conscientious citizens. Yet, when I think of higher education today, I think of a James Joyce quote. Joyce said, "When the soul of a man is born, there are nets flung at it to hold it back from flight. You talk to me of nationality, language, religion. I shall try to fly by those nets." Today it seems there are more nets than ever. Today students struggle to fly past a poor job market, around unpaid internships, and through the sticky web of student debt that is nearly as wide as the sky itself. And when curricula lack the liberal arts, college itself becomes another net. This education has taught me that one does not become free simply by staying out of debt or living cheaply in a large, creepy vehicle. Rather, we must first undergo a period of self-examination to see for the first time what nets have been holding us back all along. Unfortunately, economic realities and political priorities require that most students pay an unreasonable amount of money for their educations, even though the great majority of students only wish to better themselves and society. Yet I find it funny and fitting that those of my friends who went into nearly inescapable debt to pay for their educations still say they wouldn't go back and change a thing. Today, I leave Duke much the same way I came. I have exactly $1,156, no job, and a degree that is, let's face it, not going to have me, or most of us, rolling on a mattress covered in $20 bills. And to keep out of debt, I've recently put the van up for sale. While I am more or less broke, in exchange for the education I have bought, I have received a wealth in return. I speak of the wealth of ideas, of truth. Such is a currency without rates, a coinage that will not rust, capital I cannot spend. I may leave this place with empty pockets, but I shall carry this wealth with me whether I am young or old, at home or abroad, housed or homeless, rich or poor, till the end of my days. Thank you. The crowd cheered, and my parents cried. I stepped off the podium and walked back toward my seat. My experiment was over. In the days that followed, I wondered what I should do. Should I take the magazine job and all that came with it? The salary, the health insurance, the comfortable life? Was it time to finally settle down? I wondered what Thoreau would have done. He was many things. A surveyor, a naturalist, a handyman, a pencil maker, but I thought of Thoreau as a writer more than anything else. And his greatest story wasn't one of his essays or Walden. His greatest story, I thought, was his life. He knew that anything is possible when you wield the pen and claim your life as your own. But the truth is that so few have the privilege to write their own stories. People are born into poverty without hope of redemption. Children are abused and damaged. Disease and war and famine and a million other things prevent them from wielding the pen. But for those of us who can, should it not be our great privilege to live the lives we've imagined? To be who we want to be? To go on our own great journeys and share our experiences with others? When I'd looked at the austere furnishings in Thoreau's replica cabin, the single bed, the rickety chair, the desk, I thought about how Thoreau had invented this home, this lifestyle, this life. Oh, how many things we can do. Oh, how we can turn the wildest figments of our imagination into something real. Yet what stories can we write today? My generation was born in a strange age, an age when nearly every blank spot on the map has been explored, when so many of our wild places have been paved over, when there are no honorable wars to fight or frontiers to settle. Our adventures take place in virtual, vicarious video game worlds, or they're tightly crammed into a gap year. Our inner wildness atrophies without a place to exercise it. We are cubicle monkeys and lone drones. Generation screwed. Maybe there is no longer a frontier, but for me, the frontier is a horizon as wide and endless as it was for the first pioneers. We have real villains who need vanquishing, corrupt institutions that need toppling, and the great American debtor's prison to break out of. We have trains to hop, voyages to embark on, and rides to hitch. And then there's the great American wild, vanishing, but still there, ready to impart its wisdom from an Alaskan peak or a patch of grass growing in a crack of a city sidewalk. And no matter how much sprawl and civilization overtake our wilds, we'll always have the boundless wildlands in ourselves to explore. This graduation was different from the last one. This time, I was debt-free. But I was more than debt-free. With the whole world within my grasp and ready to be seized, why should I call this the end of my adventures when it can just be another beginning? I turned down the job offer and said goodbye to friends, family, and professors. I said goodbye to Duke and North Carolina. I said goodbye to my beloved Econoline. Might I have an actual job one day? Maybe. Might I come to live in a home that doesn't have wheels? Probably. I had many lives to live still, and I'd get to them, but just not yet. On a sunny day in early June, I gave away half my stuff, filled up my backpack, and stepped onto a plane that was headed to Alaska. I was nervous about turning a new page and starting a new chapter, but I knew both by faith and experience that I'd be okay if I lived simply and kept a light load. I knew I'd be okay if I forever thought of myself as a student, whether seated within the walls of the classroom or on foot through the University of the Great Outdoors. And most of all, I knew I'd be okay if I listened to the oft unheard voice within, that wild man who whispers into your ear when you most need it and least expect it. Go for it.